Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Luz stomped her foot, roared, and clenched her fists in frustration. You're impossible to talk to. Every word I say, you take it the wrong way. Can you at least listen to me once and understand what I'm trying to impress upon you? Augustin glared at his wife with anger. His fists were clenched too, ready to pounce. Only their 11-year-old daughter, Valeriana, prevented him from doing so, as she huddled near the closet in fear. If you knew how to talk normally, I'd listen to you. But you start hurling insults right away. How long are you going to torment me? Luz shouted at her husband. I'm not tormenting you. It's you who are tormenting me. Can't we calmly talk and sort everything out once and for all? Augustin shook his head and nodded towards Valeriana. Why are you shouting like this? You scared your daughter, and it's you who calls me crazy? Wake up, or it will be too late. Luz took a deep breath, calmed herself, and looked at her daughter. Valeriana stood there, tears streaming down her face. She was biting the fingers of her right hand, and Luz noticed that one of her fingers had a small cut. Poor child, what she had to endure. The divorce of parents is never easy, especially when it happens in such a turbulent atmosphere. It's even worse. Luz had told herself 100 times that she shouldn't argue in front of her daughter. But she couldn't help it. She and Augustin couldn't stay in the same place for more than 5 minutes without starting to argue, and they didn't even live together anymore. Yet, they would always end up quarreling, shouting, and fighting, and Valeriana was almost always present during these episodes. Luz looked at her husband again and said quietly, Leave. Leave now. We'll talk later. When later? We need to figure everything out as soon as possible, both about the house and Valeriana. I don't have any more time. Luz shook her head. No, we'll figure everything out later. You'll have to make time. But right now, I need to calm our daughter. Please leave, I'm asking you, for her sake, not mine. Augustin looked at his daughter once more. Valeriana closed her eyes and continued to cry. He wanted to approach her, but Luz immediately stepped forward and stood between him and the child. She shook her head and extended her hand. I said, leave. Leave with no scandal, or we'll both make it worse. And Augustin left. Luz took her daughter's hand and pulled her towards the couch. They sat together, and Luz embraced Valeriana. After a few minutes, the girl stopped crying. She snuggled up to her mother but continued to bite her nails. Aren't you sorry for your fingers? Luz asked gently. Valeriana shook her head. But they won't get better. You should be sorry for your fingers, but you're hurting them yourself. Please stop. Valeriana pulled her hand out of her mouth and clenched it into a fist. Forgive us for behaving like this. Your dad and I just can't resolve a few issues. We'll try not to argue anymore, I promise. Will you get back together, and we'll all live together again? The little girl asked quietly. Luz sighed and hugged her daughter tightly. She couldn't lie to her. She had to tell her the whole truth. No, sweetie, your dad and I won't live together anymore. But we love you very much, so we want you to be happy. I promise everything will be fine. You just have to be patient, just a little bit. Valeriana remained silent. Luz looked at the wall where a photo of her mother hung. She was born in the village, moved to the city to find her happiness, and then got married. Antonia lived in the village. She had come to the city a few times to pamper her granddaughter when she was little. Luz sometimes took Valeriana to the village, and now an idea crossed her mind. Why not take Valeriana to her grandmother for the summer while she and Augustin sorted things out? Yes, that would be the best option. Her daughter wouldn't have to witness her parents' fights and arguments. Antonia would be happy to spend time with her granddaughter. She hadn't seen her for over a year. Perhaps Valeriana would become less nervous. Would you like to go to your grandmother in the village? Luz suddenly asked her daughter. To Grandma's? What about you? Will you come with me? Valeriana asked hopefully. Luz shook her head. No, sweetie, I'll have to stay here. I have a lot of things to take care of, things to resolve. I'll take you to your grandma's, and you'll stay there for a few months, and then I'll come back for you. Okay? But I'll be bored there without you. What will I do there? Grandma will be busy with her own stuff, the girl said sadly. Luz smiled and gently stroked her daughter's head. No, sweetheart, you won't be bored. There are many other children your age there. You'll make friends with someone for sure. You'll spend the whole summer playing and having fun. You'll see, you'll like it. We'll pack your things today, and I'll take you there tomorrow. Okay? Valeriana didn't say anything. She was used to obeying her parents. If Mom said she had to go, it meant she would go to her grandma's in the village. She would be bored there, but she would endure it somehow. Maybe if she behaved well, Mom would come back sooner. Maybe during that time, her parents would make up. Valeriana didn't understand what had happened between her parents, but she could feel that it was something bad. Mom and Dad had often argued and shouted at each other, but they always made up. Maybe while Valeriana was away, a miracle would happen and they would reconcile. She was already imagining how they would come for her together, and she would be happy. The next day, Luz took her daughter to her mother's house. Antonia was delighted to see her granddaughter. Seeing her chewed-up fingers, the mother sternly looked at her adult daughter. Luz, what have you done to the child? She doesn't need to witness your relationship troubles. Why didn't you bring her earlier? Luz lowered her gaze. Well, there's school, she couldn't skip. How would she catch up later? We've been trying to sort things out for a long time. She was supposed to live with you for a year if we'd brought her sooner. Antonia waved her hand at her daughter. Come on in and have some food. You must be tired from the trip. I'll put you to bed, and you'll go back tomorrow. Don't worry about Valeriana, I'll look after her. She's so thin. I'll fatten her up here. It's as if you never feed her, Luz. What kind of mother are you, as if it wasn't me who gave birth to you? City life has completely spoiled you. Mom, don't make things up, I feed her. It's just her body type, Luz objected. Oh, body type, you're telling me. As if I don't see that she looks unhealthy. Your problems have worn her out, Antonia grumbled. The next day, Luz went back home, leaving Valeriana with her grandmother. For the first few days, she stayed inside and felt homesick. Her grandmother tried to cheer her up, suggesting they go to the garden and do something, but Valeriana stubbornly refused to go outside. Antonia eventually stopped pushing her and decided that Valeriana would come out when she's ready. And it happened. A week passed, and Valeriana realized that she was very bored. One day, looking out of the kitchen window, she saw a group of kids her age walking by the house on the road. They caught Valeriana's interest, but, of course, she couldn't just approach them. After a while, the girl went out to the yard to her grandmother. She approached her and asked, "What are you doing, Grandma?" Antonia looked attentively at her granddaughter. She decided not to emphasize that just a few days ago, Valeriana had shown no interest in what her grandmother did in the garden. You city folks don't understand rural matters at all. You probably don't even know what people can do in the village, right? I'm weeding, my dear. I planted some flowers here, and the weeds have grown so much that you can't even see the flowers. It's not good, they'll wither away and won't please the eye with their beauty. Valeriana half listened to her grandmother. She glanced sideways at the street where children of her age were having fun. Antonia noticed her granddaughter's gaze, smiled, but didn't say anything. For a while, Valeriana wandered around the garden, glancing at the street. Then, one of the girls spotted her and said something to the others. All the kids stared at Valeriana. The girl felt self-conscious and went back to her grandmother. Maybe you'd like some help with something? Antonia smiled affectionately. If you want, you can help. I won't refuse your assistance. See that small watering can over there? You can bring it to me. It's not heavy. I'm not afraid it will be too heavy for me, Valeriana confidently replied. She brought the watering can to her grandmother, then stood and watched as she watered the flowers she had freed from the weeds. Then Valeriana heard a whistle. She turned and looked at the street. A group of children, whom she had seen before and who had piqued her interest, was standing near the fence. Valeriana wanted to turn away, but one girl smiled and loudly said to her, "Don't you want to come out and play with us?" Valeriana opened her mouth in surprise. They were complete strangers, so why were they inviting her to join them? She glanced at her grandmother, who lightly nodded at the children and whispered, "These are good kids. They are almost all our neighbors. You can play with them if you want. I trust them, they would never do anything wrong. Go ahead, go out to them." Valeriana looked at the girl, and then another girl waved to her and shouted, "Come on. We need one more person for our game, and we need you." Valeriana approached the children, and they introduced themselves. "What's your name?" asked the blonde girl with long braids. "Valeriana." "Valeriana. Oh, what a cool name." "We'll call you Valeria," replied the tall boy. Valeriana wanted to be offended, but she couldn't. It was said so good-naturedly. She smiled in response. Valeriana quickly remembered their names. This redhead is Pedro, the blonde girl with long braids is Olga, the teary girl is Camelia, who is very cheerful but often cries for any reason. This tall one is Rodrigo, he likes to fight. They quickly became friends. The kids included her in a game she had never heard of before. They explained the rules, and she quickly caught on. For the rest of the day, Valeriana played with the kids. She was having so much fun and felt so good that she didn't even think about her parents, didn't feel homesick, and didn't miss them. Time flew by unnoticed, and she only snapped out of it when her grandmother called her for dinner. Valeriana looked sadly at the kids. She didn't want this day to end. For some reason, she felt like they wouldn't be able to hang out anymore. But Olga confidently said, "All right, tomorrow morning, we'll be waiting for you by the yard. You'll come out with us again, right? Tomorrow, we were planning to go to the river. Will you come with us?" Valeriana smiled and looked back at her grandmother. "You can go with them to the river tomorrow. But for now, let's go inside, it's time for dinner. I promised your mother that I would feed you well, and you haven't eaten all day," Antonia said. Valeriana turned to the kids and said goodbye. "See you tomorrow, then." The girl had walked so much that she even asked her grandmother for seconds. Antonia watched her granddaughter with a smile. Thank God, she's perked up a bit, she was looking so pale and in low spirits before. Now she even has a bit of color on her cheeks, and her eyes are shining with happiness. That night, Valeriana slept so well, better than ever before, it seemed to her. She thought she would be thinking about her parents and their divorce, but she fell asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. In the morning, she woke up early, had a quick breakfast, and her grandmother gave her some food and a water bottle. Valeriana packed everything into her small backpack. "Did your mom give you a swimsuit, at least?" Antonia asked. "Yes, I took it with me just in case," the girl replied. "Well, that's great. Then put it on right away, maybe you'll go for a swim in the river. It's not deep there, and there are a lot of people, and the kids will be with you." "Wait, can you swim?" "I can swim, I used to go to the pool," Valeriana said. "Well, thank God for that. Run along, the kids are already waiting for you behind the fence." Valeriana kissed her grandmother and ran out onto the street. Approaching the other children, she felt a little embarrassed. Two more unfamiliar kids were with them. "Hi, meet Tobias and his sister Marta, they're coming with us," Olga said. "Hi," Valeriana replied quietly, looking at the beautiful mole on the boy's cheek. "Hi," Tobias replied, staring at her with his dark eyes. "You can call her Valeria, that's what we all call her," Rodrigo said. "Valeria, what a beautiful name. I won't call her that. I like Valeriana better, Tobias replied, looking directly into the girl's eyes. His gaze made Valeriana feel embarrassed. She suddenly felt a warm sensation inside. No, she wasn't upset with the kids for calling her Valeria, but this boy pronounced her name so beautifully that she wanted him to say it more often. The kids headed to the river. It so happened that Tobias walked alongside Valeriana. He talked nonstop, and Valeriana found it very easy to talk to him. Tobias was almost her age, Valeriana was 11, and Tobias was 12. But he spoke like an adult. He had never been to the city, so he asked Valeriana about her city life. He was interested in how teaching in a city school differed from teaching in a village school. After their conversation, Tobias realized that it wasn't that different. They walked and talked all the way to the river, and by the time they arrived, Valeriana considered him her best friend. It was the best summer of Valeriana's life. Every day, she and her friends gathered, played, had fun. Tobias had a guitar, and he played it very well. Often in the evenings, they would gather and sing songs. Tobias tried to teach Valeriana how to play the guitar, but she couldn't quite get the hang of it. Valeriana had found the truest friends. They got along very well, as if they were family to each other. In mid-August, Luz came to pick up her daughter. She came for a few days to visit her mother. When Valeriana told her friends that she would be leaving in a couple of days, they were all very upset. Why can't she wait at least the end of the summer? We still had 10 more days. I haven't even shown you our calf yet, Olga said with a disappointed tone. Valeriana didn't say anything. She looked at Tobias, and he looked at her. There was such regret in his eyes that it made Valeriana want to cry. She didn't want to part with her friends, especially with Tobias. There was some connection between them that Valeriana didn't know how to describe. She wished she didn't have to leave here ever. She thought she could live with her grandmother, go to the village school like the other kids, and it would be wonderful. But Valeriana knew that she shouldn't even mention it to her mother. She would never agree. Her mom had left her here to divorce Valeriana's father, and now they had settled their affairs, and her mom had come to take her back to the city. But Valeriana planned to come back here next summer. She wanted to ask her mom to let her come for the winter holidays too. Her friends had told her how much fun it was in the village for New Year's. They had celebrations here, and it was so much fun. Valeriana really wanted to come here in the winter. I promise you that I'll come next year, Valeriana told her friends. And for New Year's, you promise to come for the winter holidays too, Olga replied. Yes, I'll definitely come for New Year's, and we'll see each other again. You'll teach me how to ice skate, Valeriana said. 2 days later, Luz packed her daughter's things. They were planning to leave early in the morning. Valeriana hoped she would have time to say goodbye to her friends, but her mother decided that they needed to get up very early to catch the first train. Valeriana cried and pleaded for them to stay a little longer, but her mother decided otherwise. When Luz and Valeriana left the house with their suitcases, the girl saw a lonely figure near the fence. It was Tobias. While Luz said her goodbyes to Valeriana's grandmother, the girl ran up to the boy. "You're leaving already?" Tobias asked. "Yes, I'm leaving. Will you say hi to everyone else for me? Tell them we left early. I asked my mom if we could stay just a little longer, but she said we couldn't delay any further. Give them my warm regards." "All right, I'll pass the message," Tobias sadly replied. They looked at each other for a while, and then Tobias reached out his hand through the fence. "Well, goodbye," he said. Valeriana shook his warm hand tightly and replied, "Goodbye." She felt so sad that tears welled up immediately. Tobias held her hand tightly for a long time. Then he turned and started walking away, but suddenly stopped and said, "Do you promise you'll come back? We'll see each other again, right? You're not lying?" "Of course, I promise, I'll definitely come. If I can't make it for New Year's, then for sure in the summer. I'll do everything to see each other again," Valeriana replied. Tobias nodded in satisfaction, then blew her an air kiss and ran back home. Valeriana and her mom returned to the city. Now the house was quiet. Her mom and dad had divorced. He had moved to another city where he already had a new family, as it turned out. They didn't sell the house. Luz took out a loan and paid her husband half the value of the house. Valeriana never saw her father again. After learning that he had another family and another child, she had no desire to see him either. Luz didn't apply for child support. She didn't want anything to do with Augustin. They had a daughter together, and that was enough for him. Valeriana didn't think about her father anymore. The best summer of her life left her with so many memories that she lived through them. She tried to excel in her studies to not disappoint her mom and hoped that her mom would allow her to go to her grandmother's for New Year's and spend the holidays there. However, at the end of autumn, when Valeriana brought up the topic, her mother screamed, "What a nonsense! Go to the village for New Year's, to that backwater place. I'm not doing that. You have no idea what it will be like there. I've lived there all my life, I know. Everything will be buried in snowdrifts. What will you do in the village? Stay home with your grandmother? You'll have so much fun." "I won't just stay home with Grandma, I have friends there, Mom." "We'll go out, have fun," Valeriana replied. "Going out? No, you'll be drowned in a snowdrift there, and they won't find you until spring." "No, it's out of the question, we're not going to any village for New Year's. Besides, I have work, there's a loan hanging over me, you know that. I'll take extra shifts during the holidays, I won't have time to take you there." "Mom, but I promised my friends I would come." "Then you shouldn't have promised if you didn't ask me about it first. Look at how smart you are." "That's it, end of discussion. We won't talk about it anymore." Valeriana was terribly disappointed, but there was nothing she could do. Those were the ugliest and saddest New Year's holidays she had ever had. She had so much hope to see her friends, but it didn't work out, and not even the New Year's present under the tree from her mother cheered her up. Valeriana hoped that her mom would at least take her to her grandmother's for the summer. She really hoped for it, but fate had other plans. Her grandmother passed away. Luz didn't even know how to tell her daughter. She understood that this would be a great sorrow in Valeriana's life. When the girl learned about her grandmother's death, she was in shock. She had never cried so bitterly in her entire life. Her grandmother's death meant that Valeriana would never go to the village again because her mother wouldn't stay there with her for 3 months, and there was no one else to go to. Valeriana begged her mother to take her to the funeral, but Luz categorically refused to do so. "There's no reason for you to be at the funeral. It's not entertainment, it's grief. I don't have time to deal with you there." "Mommy, I want to go. I want to say goodbye to Grandma, and I need to see my friends. I have to tell them that I just couldn't make it for New Year's. They'll think I forgot about them." Luz became angry with her daughter. "Grandma has passed away, and all you can think about is your friends. I didn't expect such indifference from you. You're not going anywhere with me, and that's final." Luz left to arrange the funeral. She asked the neighbor to look after Valeriana while she wasn't at home. Valeriana cried and had trouble sleeping at night. She even had a fever due to her worries and couldn't go to school. Of course, she was thinking about her friends, but she also felt very sorry for her grandmother. In the 3 months she had spent with her, she had grown so attached. Her grandmother had become a real family member to her, even though she had rarely seen her before. But Valeriana was also troubled by something else. She realized that she wouldn't be going to the village anymore because there was no one to stay with her for those 3 summer months. Some time passed, and it was the end of May. Valeriana started thinking more and more about the upcoming summer break. Last year, she had yearned for this summer. She imagined herself going to her grandmother's for 3 months, meeting her friends again, seeing Tobias, Pedro, Olga, Camelia, Rodrigo. She thought about all the adventures they could have together. She needed to persuade her mom to visit the village for even a short time and stay at her grandmother's house. Her mom had a 2-week vacation in June. Valeriana hoped she could convince her mother to go together. The day before her vacation, she asked, "Mom, why don't we go to the village?" Luz frowned at her daughter. "What village are you talking about?" "Well, to the village. We could stay at Grandma's house, get some fresh air. I'll show you where the river is. We can swim there, the water is very clean and cool. We can sunbathe on the banks. It'll be a lot of fun, Mom, and you can take a break from work." "Oh no, what village, Valeria? I've been looking forward to this vacation. No way we're going to any village. I have other plans. We're going to the sea for a week, and then you'll stay with Aunt Laura while I go to Cyprus with friends for 5 days. I've been invited, and there's a spot reserved just for me in the car." No village. I have different plans. But I don't want to go to the sea, Mom, I want to go to the village. Valeriana objected. "Valeria, don't anger me, we're not going to any village. I know what you're trying to do. You want to see your imaginary friends? Valeriana, it's time for you to grow up. You made friends with those kids last summer, but that doesn't mean you're real friends. They've long forgotten about you, but you can't seem to get them out of your head. Stop talking about that village, I'm not going there, and I'm certainly not going to live there." All of Valeriana's hopes shattered like a bubble. She had believed so strongly that she could convince her mom to spend even just a week in the village. Valeriana couldn't eat properly or sleep, her dreams were constantly filled with thoughts of her friends. When Tobias appeared in her dreams, she would wake up in tears. She missed them so much, she felt incredibly lonely. It was the most melancholic summer of her life. When her mother returned from the funeral, Valeriana persistently questioned her. "Did you see any of the kids? Didn't they ask about me? Maybe someone inquired about me? Did you mention anything about me? Did you see a dark-haired boy with dark eyes? You should have seen him, Mom. Please remember, did anyone ask about me? Valeria, leave me alone. Nobody asked about you, nobody cared about that. I was busy with arrangements and burying your grandma, and you're asking me about your friends. That's enough, forget about them and stop bothering me about it. I don't want to talk about this anymore." Her mother responded wearily. Valeriana realized that she wouldn't achieve anything by pressing further. Summer passed, followed by autumn. Valeriana learned that her mother had sold her grandmother's house. The girl reacted vehemently. "How could you do this? Why did you sell the house? Now we'll never go to the village." She shouted at her mother. "Valeriana, have you forgotten who I am? I'm your mother, not your friend. Don't you dare raise your voice at me, that's not how you should behave with me. I sold the house because it was necessary. With that money, I could pay off the loan I took to settle your useless father's debts. Do you think it was easy for me to pay him off? I had to save every extra penny. Now we have no more debts. I sold it, and that's it. Forget about living in the village. I never intended to live there, nor did I ever plan to visit there for leisure. I had enough of growing up there. I didn't need that house, your grandma is no longer here, and no one would live there. It would have fallen apart with each passing year. And in its dilapidated condition, nobody would have bought it. You should have asked me. Maybe I would have grown up and moved there to live." Valeriana yelled. "What nonsense is in your little head? You're living and studying in the city not for the sole purpose of moving to the village later. I want you to get into university, find a good job. What's there in the village for you? What will you do there? Your friends don't need you anymore, they've long forgotten about you." "That's not true, they haven't forgotten about me. Nobody has forgotten about me." Valeriana whispered and started crying. Luz felt a pang of sympathy for her daughter. She realized she had been too harsh on her. She said gently, "Valeriana, don't be upset. I'm just telling you the truth. I've never lied to you. You had a great summer with your cheerful friends. You had fun and socialized, but that time has passed. Your grandmother is no longer here, and the house is gone. Forget about those friends of yours, you will never see them again. Listen to me, sweetheart. I don't wish any harm to you. Valeriana didn't bring up the topic of the village, her friends, or her grandmother with her mother anymore. Luz thought her daughter had come to terms with it, but that wasn't the case. Valeriana just couldn't bear talking to her mother anymore. The hurtful things her mother said were unpleasant to her. She couldn't believe that her friends had forgotten about her. After all, they had promised to remember each other. Valeriana also realized that she couldn't stop thinking about Tobias. The connection that had formed between them. With time, the girl understood what it was. She realized that he was more than just a friend to her. She felt genuine emotions for him. She couldn't call it love because she was still young, but it was a very strong attachment. More than anything, Valeriana longed not for her friends, but specifically for Tobias. She promised herself that she would meet him someday, to explain why she hadn't come to her grandmother's, that it wasn't her fault, but circumstances. Sweetie, you won't be upset with me if we do it this way, will you? Tell me you won't be, my dear. Understand, I have no other choice. Valeriana looked at her mother and didn't know what to say. Perhaps from the outside, it looked like her mother was abandoning her. In reality, Valeriana was even glad that things turned out this way. She was nearly 18. Her mother was getting married for the second time. But she wasn't just moving in with her new husband, she was planning to relocate to another city. Her new husband, Gasper, had come to their city on a long business trip. It lasted for 6 months, and during that time, Gasper and Luz fell in love with each other. Now Gasper had to return home. He couldn't just stay away, especially since he had a good job he didn't want to give up. So, he proposed to Luz and asked her to marry him and move with him. Luz immediately told her fiancé that if she moved, it would only be with her daughter. Gasper was fine with that. Valeriana, however, was against it. She said she didn't want to leave. She was finishing high school, and she didn't want everything to change so suddenly. Valeriana suggested that her mother leave her behind and go herself. Luz understood that this was a reasonable option, but her conscience troubled her. How could she leave her daughter alone? That was not something she could do. However, Valeriana reassured her mother, saying it would be the best option for both of them. Mom, you have to understand, I have exams coming up. If I switch to another school, things might not go as smoothly. But how can I leave you? I can't allow that. Maybe Gasper should leave, and I'll stay with you for now. You'll finish school, and then we can move to be with him, and you can enroll in the university there. You've always wanted to go to medical school or something, and there's a very good medical university in his city. I'll talk to Gasper, he'll help with the finances. Mom, go with him, I'll stay here. I'm old enough to be on my own. Once I finish school and take my exams, we can decide what to do. Just don't stay with me, go with him. Luz did as Valeriana suggested. She and Gasper got married, and she left with her new husband, leaving her daughter alone. Now Valeriana was on her own. She did well on her exams, but it wasn't enough to get into the medical university in her city. She called her mother and told her about it. Mom, now you can find out about that university in your city. I'll start packing my things. You call me and let me know everything. However, Luz's response was strange. You know, Valeriana, Gasper said that it takes a lot of money to get into that university, and he doesn't have that kind of money, and he won't pay for your education. So, I think there's no point in applying here. Maybe you can find something easier for yourself? Besides, what's with this medicine obsession? Why don't you go to a teacher's college instead? Teachers are always in demand. Or choose some other college. Study for 3 years, get a profession, and then you can work wherever you want. Mom, you know I wanted to be a doctor. Why are you talking as if it doesn't matter anymore? You've always said you wanted me to go to university. What happened? Why are you telling me about college now? Oh, stop it, nothing happened. I'm just trying to make you understand that I can't help you with anything. I haven't found a job here yet. Gasper supports me. I can't force him to pay for your education. He's not your father. Find an easier option. When you do, call me, and we'll figure out what to do next. After the conversation with her mother, Valeriana realized that she had no one else to rely on. Her mother had remarried and moved far away. Now Valeriana would have to take care of herself. She understood that her stepfather simply didn't want to provide her with the finances she needed for her education. Valeriana had to come up with a plan quickly. And she did. She dreamed of a future in medicine, and she was determined to make it happen, even if she couldn't become a doctor. Valeriana applied to a medical college, and they accepted her. When she told her mother about it, Luz suddenly screamed. "I told you to forget about medicine. Gasper said it's ungrateful work. You should have listened to me. Why did you go against my wishes?" "Because it's my life, Mom. I dreamed of becoming a doctor. Unfortunately, that dream will remain just a dream. But at least I'll still be in the field of medicine. You keep telling me, Gasper says this, Gasper says that, don't do this, do it differently. I don't recognize you anymore, Mom. You've become so different, and I don't like it. I've already been accepted to college, and there's no turning back. I'll live here, and maybe I'll visit you during holidays." Then Valeriana heard something she never expected to hear from her mother. "Valeriana, you see, there's something you need to know. You can't come visit us for a while. Gasper has decided to build a house. He sold his 3-bedroom apartment and bought a small 1-bedroom. He invested all the remaining money in buying land and construction. I think the construction will take several years, and for now, we'll be living in a 1-bedroom apartment. It's already cramped for the 2 of us, and there's no space for you. But don't worry, I'll come visit you myself and help you with money. Since you've decided to study at the medical college, let it be that way. As long as you're happy, that's the most important thing. I'll visit often, okay? You're not mad at me, are you? You're such a grown-up girl now, you know what you need to do." Valeriana understood it all. She understood that she couldn't rely on her mother anymore. Her mother had a new family now, and she wouldn't take care of Valeriana, despite her earlier claims. Valeriana felt that she could only rely on herself. "Sweetie, you're not upset, are you?" Her mother continued to inquire. "No, I'm not upset, don't worry. Everything will be fine for me," Valeriana replied. Valeriana became a student at the medical college. At first, it was challenging because she had no support. Her mother had promised to help with money, but that never happened. Valeriana didn't expect anything else. She had to work as a hospital orderly to make ends meet. Her salary and the college stipend were enough to get by. Her mother visited very rarely. When she did, she gave Valeriana a bit of money, but didn't offer any other help. Valeriana didn't visit her mother and her new husband, and her mother never invited her. Her mother had a new life in a different city, and Valeriana didn't fit into it. After her first year of college, things got easier for Valeriana. She made new friends, and her studies became more manageable. Money was tight at times, and it was tough to work nights and study during the day, but Valeriana managed. She endured all the hardships with determination. She knew she was responsible for her own future and worked hard to ensure that everything would turn out well. When Valeriana was about to graduate from college, her friend Estrella asked, "Would you like to specialize and work in the emergency medical services?" Valeriana paused to think. "I hadn't considered it, but I don't think so." "Why not?" "I've heard they pay well there." "Of course, the work can be tough, but everyone gets used to it." "I think we will too. Just imagine, helping people, providing first aid, it's so cool." "So, let's do the specialization," Estrella tried to persuade her. But Valeriana shook her head. "I don't like the idea. Besides, I've already found a place in the hospital where I work now. After college, I'll be appointed as a nurse. They already know me there, and the doctors treat me well. I like it there. I want to stay as a nurse." Estrella frowned. "Being a nurse is so boring. You'll be carrying bedpans and changing bed linens. What's interesting about that? In the emergency medical services, you'd be saving lives." Valeriana smiled. "Where did you get the idea that I'll be carrying bedpans and changing bed linens? Orderlies do that." "Yes, I do it now, but when I become a nurse, I'll have different responsibilities." "Oh, come on, everyone there knows you as an orderly. They're used to you doing that work. When you become a nurse, they'll still ask you to do the same things," Estrella argued. "No, I'll have different responsibilities, you'll see." Valeriana was right. After graduating from college, she was appointed as a nurse in the trauma department. It wasn't the same department where she had worked as an orderly. She had wanted to stay in the admission department, but there was no vacancy, so Valeriana had to transfer to the trauma department. She started her job with enthusiasm and wanted to build good relationships with all her colleagues. However, she soon encountered a significant problem. Valeriana was a beautiful young woman. She had never emphasized her looks and didn't make an effort to highlight her beauty. She dressed modestly, didn't wear heavy makeup, but her natural beauty shone through. With each passing year, she blossomed even more, and people couldn't help but notice her. Christina, the head of the trauma department, treated Valeriana well. However, not everyone in the staff was as welcoming. When Valeriana met the senior nurse, Ines, she immediately sensed that the woman looked at her with disapproval. After some time, she realized the reason behind it. One day, Ines called her over and said, "Valeriana, I understand that you're young and have a lot of energy, but you must take your job seriously. I won't tolerate any unserious behavior in our department. If you think your beauty gives you the right to neglect your duties, you're deeply mistaken." Valeriana was very surprised. "Ines, how have I compromised myself? I don't understand what you mean." The senior nurse smirked. Valeriana was taken aback by Ines's accusations. "I see how you flirt with the patients. This is unacceptable. I've heard that some patients specifically request you, and they have a biased attitude towards other nurses, saying all sorts of nonsense just to have you give them injections or set up their IVs. They view other nurses as rude and uncaring because you put yourself above everyone else, smile too much, and are overly polite with patients. You should treat everyone equally. If you want to have a personal life, do it outside the hospital. I won't tolerate this here." "What personal life, Ines? What are you talking about? There's nothing like that. I treat everyone the same. All patients are important to me. I don't favor anyone. There's no such thing as me giving more attention to some and less to others. I'm diligently fulfilling my duties. Has someone complained about me?" "No, patients haven't complained about you, but the other nurses are dissatisfied with you. They say you deliberately act this way so that everyone loves only you. I'm telling you, reconsider your approach to work. Giving too much attention to patients can be a problem too. Being overly caring will lead to burnout. And burnout is unacceptable in our line of work. It affects the whole department," Ines said firmly. Valeriana began. But her superior cut her off. "That's enough. The conversation is over. I've said what I wanted to. Now go back to work." Valeriana couldn't prove that she simply loved her job too much. She understood what Ines was talking about. Other nurses acted as if they despised the patients in their care. Any other nurse would inevitably complain about someone. Valeriana never criticized anyone. For her, patients were simply sick and unhappy people, and she treated them all equally. Whether it was a young man on a stretcher, an elderly lady with a fractured hip, an overweight woman with an ankle fracture, a homeless man with burns or frostbite, they were all the same to Valeriana. She smiled at all of them, spoke kind words, helped, and sometimes even performed the duties of an orderly, such as carrying bedpans or assisting with changing bed linens. She did it all willingly and without expecting any gratitude. One day, another nurse asked her, "Why do you look so happy when you're carrying bedpans? And why are you doing it at all? Call an orderly, let them do it. Or are they paying you for this? What are you talking about? Why should they pay me for this? I'm just helping a sick person." You saw that woman. She had been on the bedpan for over an hour and no one had attended to her. I simply helped her and I'm not getting paid for it. Oh, come on, I know some patients pay nurses to be friendlier to them. Most likely, they're paying you too. Are you judging by yourself? Do they pay you for various services? Yes, I know many nurses get money for setting up IVs or giving injections. But that's part of our job, we get paid for that. Why should patients have to pay us? Do you mean to say that if you're not paid for, you won't do it? Valeriana asked. There's no need to look into my wallet. Everyone does things differently. Patients thank me for my golden touch. I don't see anything wrong with it. In a restaurant, they leave tips for waiters. I believe we can be thanked too for providing services to patients, the nurse replied. But we're not waiters, we're nurses. We took an oath to help those in need and the sick, and we shouldn't demand money from patients for doing our job, Valeriana calmly stated. Oh, come on, we have a righteous one here. It's better not to talk to you at all. Carry your bedpans for free if you want to. You won't get far with your kindness and compassion, her colleague retorted. After 6 months, Valeriana's relationships with her colleagues more or less settled down. Everyone got used to her, understood that she wasn't a flatterer or a pretender, but genuinely compassionate and sympathetic. Many didn't like it, but they stopped paying attention to it, accepting Valeriana as she was. She sighed more freely, and work became easier. Even Ines seemed to have stopped holding a grudge against her, occasionally even praising her for her work. But then, something happened that once again put Valeriana's reputation at risk. A new doctor, Alvaro, joined their department. Well, he wasn't entirely new. He had already worked in trauma 2 years ago, then left for an unknown destination, and now he was back. His return was met with joy because he was an excellent trauma surgeon. Alvaro had another advantage: he was quite young, only 35, and unmarried. All the nurses were smitten with him, not just in trauma but in every department of the hospital. It was no surprise, he was young, unmarried, and rather handsome. One of his smiles drove many women crazy. He smiled often because he knew of his attractiveness and the effect he had on the female sex. And he didn't discriminate, he smiled at everyone. All female patients adored him because he was polite and treated everyone well. No one ever heard a rude word from him. Alvaro immediately noticed the new nurse and started paying her a lot of attention. Valeriana felt a kindred spirit. Alvaro was good with patients, too, and that brought them closer. Of course, she had no intention of having a serious relationship with colleagues, especially not with a new doctor, but she enjoyed talking to him, which irritated everyone, especially Ines. The head nurse had her sights set on Alvaro. Ines noticed right away that Alvaro was eyeing Valeriana, and she didn't like it at all. She grew to dislike Valeriana even more. One day, the girl came to work in a good mood and ended up in the same shift as Alvaro. When the doctor saw her, he smiled and said, "Are we going to save lives today, Valeriana?" "Saving lives is your job, Alvaro." "Mine is just to help," Valeriana replied with a smile. Alvaro looked at her intently and said, "Come to my office during the lunch break. I want to discuss a patient with you, have some coffee, and talk." At that moment, Ines was passing by. She overheard the doctor inviting Valeriana to his office. Giving the young woman a hostile look, she said nothing and just walked by. Valeriana responded to the doctor, "I'm sorry, Alvaro, but I'm busy during my lunch break. I promised to help a patient figure out her phone. She's trying to call her daughter abroad." The doctor smiled and said, "Well, if you're busy, Valeriana, I won't insist. But I'd be very pleased if you dropped by." I know you appreciate coffee. I've got a new coffee machine, and I'd love to treat you and hear your thoughts. Maybe I'll drop by, but I can't promise, Valeriana replied, feeling embarrassed, and went about her business. Sitting in her office, Ines was thinking about the situation. At 37, she was still unmarried. She believed that Alvaro would make a great match for her. Ines was tall and attractive, and she thought she could be an excellent wife for the doctor. Valeriana didn't fit into her plans for winning the doctor's heart. Something needed to be done to remove her from the battlefield, to get rid of her rival. In war, all means are fair. Ines mentally declared war on Valeriana and intended to act immediately. During the lunch break, she knocked on Alvaro's door. Alvaro, may I come in? Am I disturbing you? The doctor tried to treat everyone equally. But he had a strong liking for Valeriana, while he simply treated Ines with friendliness. He smiled and replied to the senior nurse. No, you're not disturbing. Please come in. Would you like me to pour you some coffee? Ines put on what she considered an enchanting smile. Oh, yes, please, I'd love some. She sat down in the chair in front of the doctor's desk and casually crossed her legs. Before entering the office, she had intentionally unbuttoned the top button of her medical coat to expose an enticing hint of cleavage. Alvaro poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her with a smile. Ines took the cup, deliberately brushing her hand against the doctor's. Is there something you wanted to talk to me about? Alvaro asked as he settled into his chair. Yes, I wanted to talk to you. Since you're the deputy head, I thought I'd make a suggestion to you. Christina is too busy, and I don't want to bother her with minor issues. You know, I'm interested in any innovations. I recently came across a medical journal with advertisements for the latest patient care equipment. It would be great if we could replace all the stretchers in the ward. They're not very comfortable, and the patients complain when they have to use them. Maybe we should consider this? Yes, I've noticed that too. Valeriana mentioned to me that the stretchers are very uncomfortable. Ines bit her lip but quickly put on a smile. Yes, Valeriana knows better than anyone how uncomfortable they are. She's a nurse, but sometimes she does more than her job. Stretchers are supposed to be handled by the orderlies, but Valeriana often volunteers for that task, and I know why. Many patients pay her, and she's always ready to seize any opportunity to earn extra money. I told Christina that this is closer to extortion, and someone might complain about it at any moment, which would reflect poorly on the entire department. She extorts money from patients? Alvaro asked in surprise. Didn't you know? Everyone here knows. They all know, but they keep quiet. Valeriana tries to make everyone like her, but it's all just an act. She benefits from being well-liked. She couldn't fool me. I see right through her. She's very hypocritical and two-faced. Alvaro looked at Ines, and she could see doubt in his eyes. She wanted to add something else, but the doctor stopped her. You know, Ines, I'm not accustomed to discussing people behind their backs. If you're dissatisfied with something, it's better to talk to Christina. She can address it. I rely on my own judgment, and I simply don't believe in gossip. If you have evidence of someone's incompetence, it's better to discuss it with the head nurse. I can't make decisions in this matter. I'm a secondary figure in the department. And now, I must end our conversation. I have a lot of work to do. Ines realized that she had failed. Alvaro was now looking at her differently. All the friendliness had disappeared. He gave her a cold nod, indicating she could leave. Well, it was understandable. She had crossed the line by targeting Valeriana, whom he seemed to have feelings for. Ines walked out and headed back to her office. She understood that she needed to take more radical action to get rid of the intrusive rival who had thwarted her plans. She had already thought of how to do it. She just needed to choose the right time to put her plan into action. But she had to be careful not to get caught. Ines couldn't afford to be exposed. A month passed. Alvaro continued to pay a lot of attention to Valeriana. She understood that the doctor liked her, but she didn't want to have any relationship with him beyond work. Valeriana did her best to keep their professional relationship from turning personal. She was polite and hinted to him that he shouldn't expect more. One day, Alvaro directly asked her out. "Valeriana, I really like you. I'd like to meet with you outside of work. I want to invite you to the movies. I know you've said you would decline a date, but going to the movies isn't a date, it's just a friendly invitation, right?" Valeriana didn't know what to say. She hadn't been out anywhere for a long time, and she really wanted to go to the movies with the young doctor. But she understood that agreeing would give him hope, and Valeriana didn't want him to expect more. She wanted to have him as a friend without their relationship developing further. "I would really like to go to the movies with you, Alvaro, but I can't do that. I have several important reasons." "And what are those reasons?" the doctor asked with interest. Valeriana frowned slightly. "I'm sorry, I can't discuss this. It's very personal. Excuse me, I need to get back to work." From that day on, Alvaro stopped asking Valeriana out. Perhaps he thought she had someone else in her life and there was no chance for him. However, he continued to look at her with interest and a friendly smile. But Ines was far from giving up. She constantly cast unfriendly glances at Valeriana. If only Valeriana knew what kind of person the senior nurse was, she would have run out of the hospital immediately. Unfortunately, Valeriana couldn't even imagine what Ines was capable of. The senior nurse in the trauma department was indeed a formidable character. She decided to frame Valeriana. A large quantity of medications disappeared during one of Valeriana's shifts, and she was responsible for them. Everything pointed to Valeriana as the culprit. Ines had taken the medications home. And when an investigation began, with the head nurse and the chief hospital administrator involved, the senior nurse pointed out that Valeriana was responsible for the medications on that day. The hospital administrator asked Ines if Valeriana could have stolen the medications, and the senior nurse responded affirmatively. "This girl always made me suspicious. She's too polite, attentive, friendly, always smiling, but she's two-faced. You never know what people like her are really up to. This situation with the missing medication is very suspicious. I should have kept a closer eye on Valeriana. I always trusted my intuition, but this time I thought she was honest, and it got out of control. Now I'm ready to accept punishment for my mistake." "Why should I punish you?" the hospital administrator replied. "You've honestly told me everything, and we don't punish people for telling the truth. On the contrary, I'm grateful that you've always been vigilant. Well, this girl will answer for what she did. She'll be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I won't allow anyone in my hospital to behave like this. If she thinks she can get away with it, she's mistaken. I will take the strictest measures, believe me, Ines. Thank you for your cooperation, I appreciate it greatly." The senior nurse was ecstatic. She had done her dark deed and achieved what she wanted. Now, Valeriana would be out of her way, hopefully for a long time, or maybe even forever. An investigation began, and Valeriana was summoned to the hospital administrator's office. She tried to prove that she hadn't stolen any medications and even offered to allow a search of her home. "I understand perfectly well that we won't find any medications at your home. You either got rid of them or sold them to someone. So, there's no need to suggest a search. We will involve the police, and the police will decide what to do with you," said the hospital administrator. Valeriana was in shock. She hadn't expected things to escalate like this, but it had begun. The police were called to the hospital, and Valeriana was taken to the police department. She claimed she was innocent, but no one would listen. Valeriana didn't have money for a lawyer, so they assigned her a public defender named Eugenio. He listened to Valeriana very attentively. Looking at him, she felt confident that everything would be fine. Eugenio seemed like a competent professional. Valeriana was sure he could defend her, but things didn't turn out the way she had hoped. A few days later, the lawyer informed her that she faced a lengthy prison sentence. If she didn't confess to stealing the medication, things would only get worse. I can't admit to something I didn't do, Valeriana protested. The lawyer nodded understandingly. I understand your position. I'm just laying out all the options for you. You should be aware of what awaits you under any circumstances. Valeriana was horrified. During all this time, she had been alone in prison, but then they placed another woman in her cell. Valeriana couldn't bring herself to call her a normal woman. She had tattoos all over her arms, and she looked like she had seen a lot of hardship in life. As soon as the woman was placed in the cell with Valeriana, she stared at her with a menacing gaze. Valeriana tried not to make eye contact and sat with her back turned to the wall. However, even with her back turned, she could feel the unpleasant woman's gaze. Valeriana was even afraid to go to the restroom because her cellmate was right next to the toilet. She waited for late at night when she hoped her cellmate would fall asleep. During the night, Valeriana was afraid to fall asleep. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted off. She woke up to unfamiliar sounds. The cell was dark. Valeriana strained to listen. The sound seemed to be coming from the direction of the sink. It sounded like someone was hissing and writhing, as if they were banging their fists and heels against the floor. These sounds were strangely familiar, as if Valeriana had heard them before. She squinted her eyes shut and listened carefully. It struck her, it sounded like someone lying on the floor and thrashing, banging their fists and heels against the ground. Valeriana jumped up and whispered, "Hey, are you okay?" No one responded. So, Valeriana, by touch, cautiously made her way to where the sounds were coming from. After a couple of seconds, she stumbled, bent down, and reached out with her hands, immediately coming into contact with her cellmate. The woman's body was taut, like a bowstring. She was trembling all over, and foam was coming out of her mouth. Valeriana was sure it was an epileptic seizure. "Oh, my God," Valeriana whispered. What could she do in complete darkness? The woman's mouth was tightly clenched. Valeriana tried to turn her onto her side, but the woman was so strong that Valeriana couldn't manage it. She seemed glued to the floor. Talking to her was useless, she wouldn't hear or understand. The seizure was severe, and Valeriana realized that immediately. She attempted to help the woman, but suddenly, she froze and went limp. Valeriana checked her pulse, there was none, and she wasn't breathing. The woman had gone into cardiac arrest. "Hey, help! Please, somebody come over here! Help! She's dying!" Valeriana shouted with all her strength while doing her best to administer first aid. She laid the woman flat on the floor, removed her shirt, rolled it into a ball, and placed it under her head. She tilted her head back and began performing CPR. Valeriana acted calmly, as if she were at work. She didn't think about being in prison or what might be wrong with this woman. She continued with chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, again and again, shouting for help a few more times, but no one came. Valeriana kept going in complete darkness. She didn't know how much time had passed when the woman finally coughed. "Oh, thank God, you're alive," Valeriana murmured, feeling her own heart pounding with fear. The woman groaned, and at that moment, the cell's lights turned on, the lock clicked open, and a prison guard entered. "What's all this noise? Couldn't share the toilet? Why are you yelling like a maniac? Do you want me to hit you in the head? What's going on here?" The guard barked. "She's unwell, she had an epileptic seizure and stopped breathing. I did chest compressions and artificial respiration. She's breathing on her own now. Please, get someone to help. She needs to go to the hospital," Valeriana said. The guard looked at her and quickly left the cell without even closing the door. Valeriana remained sitting on the floor, holding the woman's hand. The woman stared at her with a frightened look. "It's okay. You're alive. Everything's fine. You'll get help soon, don't worry," Valeriana tightly squeezed her hand. A few minutes later, help arrived, and they even brought a stretcher. They quickly placed the woman on it, and Valeriana never saw her again. She asked the guard if everything was okay with the woman, but the guard just grunted in response. However, Valeriana noticed that the guard looked at her differently now, without the same hostility as before. She no longer insulted or shouted at her. Valeriana couldn't have imagined that saving this woman's life would reach someone higher up, but it was an unusual situation. Nothing like this had ever happened in the prison before. The news that there was an exceptional woman in the cell who had saved another woman's life in complete darkness by performing CPR and artificial respiration had reached the prison warden. The chief of security had told him all the details, as she was in close relations with him. A few days later, the prison guard entered Valeriana's cell and said, "Get ready, the warden wants to see you." "The warden? What warden?" Valeriana asked in surprise. "Oh, come on, what other warden could there be?" "The prison warden, of course." "Get ready quickly, he doesn't like to wait. And remember, don't tell him anything unnecessary. If you blabber about how poorly they treat you here, you'll be in for it, and it won't be pretty." "Got it, nurse?" "I understand," Valeriana replied dryly. She was escorted to the warden's office. When she entered, her heart pounded wildly. She felt an inexplicable excitement. The warden spoke to her, saying, "Well, hello, heroine. Nothing like this has ever happened in our facility before, and I've never summoned inmates before. But I believe that saving a person's life, even if she's just an ordinary criminal, deserves a thank you." When Valeriana heard his voice, her breath caught for a moment. She froze, gazing at the warden. Then her eyes settled on a mole on his cheek. Valeriana couldn't say anything. She just stared at the warden. After a moment of silence, the security warden entered the office. "Tobias, I need to talk to you." "Are you busy right now?" "Yes, I'm busy, but I'll be done in a few minutes." "Just wait for a moment," the warden replied. The security warden exited the office and closed the door behind him. Valeriana stared at the man sitting in front of her, speechless. She opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word. Tobias furrowed his brow. "Why have you suddenly lost your voice? It's rather impolite. At least start by saying hello." "You were summoned for an important reason," he said. Valeriana felt her mouth go dry. She coughed once before saying, "Tobias, is that really you? What's that supposed to mean? What liberties are you taking? Do we know each other?" He paused abruptly, stood up quickly from his chair, and clutched the edge of his desk with his hands. He remained silent for several seconds before moving swiftly towards Valeriana, stopping just a step away from her, and whispered softly, Valeria, is it you?" Valeriana nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Valeriana, is it really you?" Tobias repeated. Tobias moved even closer, raised his hand, and gently touched Valeriana's cheek. She tightly closed her eyes. "I thought I'd never see you again in my life. I've dreamed so much of us meeting someday, but I never thought it would happen like this and here," Tobias said, lightly stroking her cheek. Valeriana felt a strange sensation overcoming her. It seemed like she might burst into tears from this peculiar feeling that gripped her entire body. Just then, Tobias embraced her tightly, and Valeriana went limp in his arms. "Valeriana, you're so beautiful. I'm thrilled to see you again." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, each lost in their thoughts. Valeriana reminisced about that one summer when she had been truly happy, when she had socialized with the village kids, when she had met Tobias, and when she had first felt something that still lingered in her heart. Tobias, on the other hand, thought about how for 14 years he hadn't forgotten Valeriana. He had dreamt of finding her, of seeing her again. But he had been convinced that she had long forgotten about him, that the one summer she had spent in the village had been erased from her memory. However, she remembered him. It wasn't he who recognized her, she recognized him. This meant that all those years, he had also remained in her memory. Finally, Tobias released their embrace. He took Valeriana's hand and led her to his desk. "Have a seat, you've turned pale. Should I get you some water?" he asked. Valeriana still couldn't speak. She nodded again. Tobias poured her a glass of water, and Valeriana eagerly began to drink. He pulled a chair closer to her and sat down. Taking the empty glass from her hand, he placed it on the table and then asked softly, "Why didn't you ever come back to the village? We all waited for you, everyone did, and I waited for you. I waited for you every summer I lived in the village. I couldn't. My mother wouldn't allow it. And after my grandmother passed away, she sold the house. Where could I have gone, and to whom?" Valeriana replied, "To us. To me. You could have come to me and lived with me. My mom wouldn't have minded, I'm sure of it. She loved your grandmother very much and would never have abandoned her granddaughter. But I didn't know about that, and my mom would never have allowed it. She hated the village. And as I grew up, I was sure it was pointless to go back. Did those guys who spent just one summer with me really need me? I was convinced that everyone had forgotten me," Valeriana said. "No one forgot about you, at least I never did," Tobias replied. Just then, the security warden peeked into the office again. "Tobias, will you be done soon?" "No, not anytime soon. I'll call you myself later. I'll be busy for a while," Tobias replied without even turning to his subordinate. The security warden closed the door in puzzlement. Tobias turned back to Valeriana. "What happened to you? How did you end up here? And what's your story for all these years?" Valeriana told him about her life. She recounted how her father had abandoned them, and later her mother left her when she remarried. She explained that she had been living alone all this time, with no one to help her. She narrated her experiences working as a nighttime orderly and later as a nurse. She told him about how she had been framed, how she had never stolen any medications, and how there was no evidence to suggest she had done it, yet she was facing false accusations. "I never stole anything, no matter how tough things got. I always relied on my own strength. I'd rather go hungry than take something that doesn't belong to me. How could they even think I could do such a thing? I've always worked diligently and never harmed anyone," Valeriana said, her voice trembling. Valeriana burst into tears. She had found a kindred spirit, and suddenly she felt weak, unable to bear the burdens of life on her own anymore. "Why does everything in my life happen this way? Why does everyone turn away from me as if I'm a terrible monster?" she muttered through her tears. Tobias embraced her, pressing his forehead to hers. "Valeriana, don't cry. You're not alone anymore. I won't abandon you. I'll never abandon you. I found you, and you won't disappear again. I won't allow it. Do you hear me? You'll never be alone again." After a few minutes, Valeriana managed to calm down. They talked for another hour or so. He questioned her about every detail of her life, asked her questions, and then shared his own story. He had been fortunate to become a chief at the age of 26. He revealed that he was still unmarried because he hadn't met the one who could touch his heart. "No one has managed to capture my heart. You know why? Because many years ago, I gave it to a charming girl," he said. Valeriana blushed. She didn't know what to say, just stared silently at Tobias. "Do you understand what I mean?" he asked. "Maybe," she replied softly. Tobias laughed. "You know, I have a lot of connections. I'm not the least influential person in the city. Unlike my personal life, my career has been successful. I'll get to the bottom of why they treated you this way and who is plotting against you. I'll help you, do you hear me? No one will imprison you just like that. I won't allow it and will do everything to clear your name. We'll find the culprit. Do you believe me?" Valeriana nodded. "That's great," Tobias added with a smile, kissing her hand. Tobias truly had excellent connections. He found the best lawyer in the city, and they quickly sorted out Valeriana's case. It turned out there were witnesses who could attest that Valeriana was not the one who had stolen the medications. One of the orderlies had seen Ines, another orderly, commit the theft, but she had been terrified of the head nurse. With the help of the lawyer, the orderly became a new witness in court, confirming that the disappearance of the drugs was the handiwork of the head nurse in the trauma department. Valeriana was acquitted and released. Ines was taken into custody. She screamed and protested, but there was nothing she could do. After the orderlies testified against her, other people came forward who were dissatisfied with the head nurse's behavior. Half of the department attested that Ines had envied Valeriana because she was kind and attentive, and Ines had always wanted to get rid of her. Ines was convicted and sent to prison. The chief physician and the head of the trauma department apologized to Valeriana. They asked her to return to work and even offered her the position of head nurse. However, Valeriana declined, as the memories of her time working there were too heavy and unpleasant. She no longer wanted to work at that place. Tobias, true to his word, was always by Valeriana's side. After her acquittal, he invited her on a real date. A proper date. They spent the entire evening talking. Valeriana had never felt so happy, perhaps not since that one summer, 14 years ago when she had first met Tobias. He suggested taking her to the village, to her grandmother's grave. Valeriana had never been there, her mother had never taken her to the cemetery, and as far as she knew, her mother had never visited it herself. Neighbors had been looking after the grave and cared for it more than her own daughter did. Valeriana agreed. As she sat by her grandmother's grave, she said to Tobias, "You know, right now, I feel like no one ever truly loved me except my grandmother. That summer was the happiest time of my life. My grandmother genuinely cared for me, while my mother was always distant. Don't even get me started on my father. I don't even know how I managed to hold on to my faith in people after such a challenging childhood." "Maybe you just felt that everything would eventually turn out well," Tobias suggested. "Maybe. I believed that all the bad things would come to an end someday, and brighter times would come, and I would meet someone who would never abandon me, someone who would end my loneliness. That someone will be me. I will be the one who never abandons you. I will ensure you're never alone again. There's just one condition," Tobias said seriously. "What's that?" Valeriana looked at him, alarmed. Tobias smiled and took her hand. "It's a very simple condition. You have to marry me." "Marry you?" Valeriana asked in bewilderment. Tobias nodded. "Will you marry me, Valeriana?" A happy smile spread across her face. "Yes, Tobias, I will marry you." Tobias hugged Valeriana tightly, and they stood by the grave for a long time. The wind ruffled Valeriana's hair, and Tobias breathed in her scent, grateful to fate for giving him a chance to be with the person he had dreamed of for so many years.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.